A 4-year-old orphan boy is left out in the cold as punishment by his stepmother, but a millionaire found him, and what she did shocked everyone. Leave a comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The biting wind of the early morning hours pierced through the small holes in his tattered shirt, making the 4-year-old orphan boy shiver like a leaf in the wind. His bare feet touched the icy concrete of the backyard, where he had been left as punishment for spilling a glass of milk at breakfast. The cruel stepmother had locked the back door of the house, leaving only the echo of her venomous words in the air. "Learn to be more careful, you worthless thing." The little boy, who looked barely 2 years old due to severe malnutrition, huddled behind the only tree in the yard. His ribs were visible through his pale skin, and his large eyes carried a weight no child should know. He didn't cry anymore. He had learned that noise only brought more trouble. Only silent tears streamed down his dirty face as he tried to find a position that would lessen the cold that penetrated his bones. Across town, a 30-year-old millionaire adjusted the rearview mirror of her imported car. Her impeccable appearance resembled the movie stars of the golden age, with perfectly coiffed hair and a dress that cost more than many people earned in a year. She was returning from a charity gala where she had made her obligatory social appearance, greeting other members of the local elite with calculated smiles and empty conversations. Her fortune, accumulated through smart investments on Wall Street and family inheritances, allowed her to live a life of immeasurable luxury. Her net worth grew every month, her bank dividends arrived promptly, and her financial investments guaranteed an income that many would consider obscene. But behind all that wealth, there was a void that no amount of money could fill. The chauffeur carefully drove through the deserted streets when the headlights illuminated a small figure huddled on the sidewalk. The millionaire, initially distracted by her phone, looked up and felt her heart stop. There was a child, practically skeletal, trembling uncontrollably in the cold of the early morning. "Stop the car," she ordered, her voice carrying an urgency that she herself couldn't explain. "Ma'am, it might be dangerous to stop here at this hour," the chauffeur murmured, hesitant. "I said stop the car, now." She got out of the vehicle and walked slowly towards the boy, who watched her with wide, terrified eyes. As she approached, she could clearly see the deplorable state of the child. The ragged clothes barely covered his frail body, and there were strange marks on his arms that looked like old scars. "Hello, little one," she said, crouching down carefully to be at his eye level. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy didn't answer. He just stared at her with an expression that mixed fear and an almost extinct hope. She realized he was trembling violently, not just from the cold, but also from terror. Without hesitation, the millionaire took off her very expensive fur coat and carefully wrapped it around the boy's fragile body. The contrast was shocking, the luxurious fabric enveloping a child who looked like he hadn't eaten a decent meal in weeks. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly. But again there was no response. The boy's eyes only filled with tears that he tried to contain. At that moment, something awakened in the millionaire's heart, an instant and inexplicable connection with that abandoned child. She had spent years of her adult life focused only on multiplying her fortune, expanding her businesses, and maintaining her position in society. But there, faced with that devastating situation, none of that mattered. "I'm going to take you home," she decided, extending her arms to the boy. To her surprise, he didn't resist. He allowed himself to be carried to the car, where he remained in absolute silence throughout the journey to the mansion. The millionaire looked at him through the rearview mirror, noticing how his eyes observed everything around him with a mixture of fascination and distrust. Arriving home, she prepared a warm bath and found some clothes that could temporarily fit. While helping the boy to clean himself, she discovered more signs of the neglect he had suffered. His skin was dry, his hair matted, and there was a deep sadness in his eyes that cut like a blade. During the following days, the millionaire hired the best private doctors in the city. The examinations revealed severe malnutrition, acute anemia, and clear signs of prolonged neglect. But what worried the specialists most was the child's absolute silence. The boy didn't speak a single word. He only observed everything around him with those big, haunted eyes. "It may be psychological trauma," explained the pediatrician. "Children who go through extreme situations sometimes develop selective mutism as a defense mechanism." The millionaire also hired the best child therapists available. But even so, the progress was non-existent. The boy ate when offered food, slept when put to bed, but remained like a silent ghost wandering the halls of the mansion. It was during the third week that everything began to change dramatically. The doorbell of the mansion rang insistently during a rainy afternoon, and when the maid opened the door, a disheveled-looking woman with a cruel gaze forced her way in. "Where is he?" shouted the newcomer, her clothes smelling of cheap cigarettes and alcohol. "Where is the boy you stole from me?" The millionaire walked down the stairs quickly, feeling a chill grip her stomach. She didn't need to ask who that woman was. She knew instinctively that it was the person responsible for the boy's deplorable state. "I am his legal guardian," declared the cruel stepmother, brandishing some yellowed papers. "And I will sue you for kidnapping if you don't return my stepson immediately." The boy, who was playing silently in the sunroom, heard the familiar voice and hid behind an armchair, trembling violently. His face turned completely pale, and for the first time in weeks he made a sound, a low, frightened moan that cut the millionaire's heart like a razor. The situation had become a legal nightmare. The stepmother presented documents that seemed authentic, claiming to have rights over the boy since the loss of his parents, and what was even worse, she wasn't there out of love or concern. Her eyes gleamed with greed as she observed the opulence of the mansion. The tension in the air of the luxurious living room was almost palpable. The cruel stepmother walked through the mansion with greedy eyes, evaluating each piece of art, each expensive piece of furniture, as if mentally calculating the value of everything. Her steps left muddy footprints on the imported Persian rug, but she showed no embarrassment. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she growled, approaching the millionaire dangerously. "This boy legally belongs to me. I receive a monthly allowance to take care of him, and no one has the right to interfere with that." The millionaire felt a wave of nausea as she realized what those words really meant. The child was not seen as a human being, but as a source of income. Every penny intended for the boy's well-being was being diverted to support that despicable woman's addictions. "How much do you want?" asked the millionaire directly, her voice controlled but filled with contempt. The stepmother's eyes gleamed with avarice. 50,000 to start, and another 10,000 a month if you want me to keep my distance. Are you trying to blackmail me? I'm offering a civilized solution. You keep the boy, I keep the money, and everyone wins. The stepmother smiled cruelly. "Except that's not how things work. This kid is my life insurance." At that moment, the mansion's gardener appeared at the door of the living room. He was a man in his 60s, with grey hair and hands calloused by honest work. There was something in his gentle eyes that contrasted completely with the toxic atmosphere that the stepmother had brought into the house. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said respectfully to the millionaire. "The little one is very scared outside. Can I take him away from here?" The stepmother laughed with disdain. "Oh, how touching, all these rich people playing happy family. But the reality is that you have no rights over him." The gardener watched the woman with a look that mixed sadness and repulsion. There was something familiar in the situation that disturbed him deeply, but he couldn't identify what it was. During the following days, the stepmother intensified her campaign of psychological terror. She appeared at the mansion at random times, always accompanied by different suspicious men who clearly didn't have good intentions. Her visits left the boy in a state of absolute panic, causing any small progress in his recovery to be completely lost. "He's regressing," reported the child therapist during a private consultation. "The trauma is being constantly reactivated. The child needs stability and security, not this emotional roller coaster." The millionaire felt completely powerless. All her money, all her social influence, nothing seemed to be enough to protect an innocent child from a situation that was clearly wrong. Her private lawyers repeatedly explained that, from a legal point of view, the stepmother had all the rights over the boy. It was during one of those traumatic visits that something extraordinary happened. The gardener was watering the plants in the sunroom when he began to hum a soft melody. It was an old lullaby, something he used to do to soothe the flowers during the colder days. The boy, who was hiding behind a large vase, slowly peeked out in the direction of the music. For the first time in weeks, his eyes didn't show absolute fear. There was genuine curiosity, as if that melody awakened some distant and comforting memory. The gardener noticed the child's interest and continued singing, this time directing his attention more specifically to the boy. The words of the song spoke about protection, about a safe place where nothing bad could happen. Miraculously, the boy took a few timid steps towards the gardener. He didn't speak, but he did something he hadn't done since his arrival at the mansion. He smiled. It was a small and hesitant smile, but real. The millionaire, who watched the scene from afar, felt tears well up in her eyes. It was the first demonstration of genuine happiness she had seen in that child, and it was happening through the simple kindness of a man who cared for plants with the same care that should be dedicated to a child. But the momentary peace was brutally interrupted when the stepmother reappeared, this time accompanied by two even more threatening-looking men. "Enough playing around," she announced, marching directly towards the sunroom. "I've come to get him now, and I won't accept any more delays." The boy immediately hid behind the gardener, clinging to the man's pants with desperate force. For the first time since his arrival, he made a noise. Not words, but a moan of terror that cut through the air like a silent cry for help. "You're not taking that child in a state of panic," said the millionaire, placing herself between the stepmother and the boy. "I will. And if you try to stop me, these friends of mine here will make sure I leave here with what is rightfully mine." The gardener, realizing the growing tension, crouched down next to the boy and began humming the same melody again. Surprisingly, the child seemed to calm down a little, although he was still trembling violently. It was at that moment that the millionaire made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to try to resolve the situation with money, she decided to investigate the stepmother's background more deeply. There was something wrong with the whole situation, something that went beyond simple greed. "Very well," she said, forcing her voice to sound calm. "But before anything else, I want to see all the legal documents. Originals, not copies." The stepmother hesitated for a fraction of a second, enough time for the millionaire to realize that she had found an opening. "The documents are in order. I don't need to prove anything to you." "If they are in order, there's no problem in showing them, right?" Meanwhile, the gardener continued singing softly to the boy, who seemed hypnotized by the melody. There was something in the music that touched a deep part of the child's memory, something that went beyond trauma and fear. The stepmother, realizing that she was losing control of the situation, decided to use her final weapon of manipulation. "Fine. If you want to make things difficult, I'm going to make your lives a living hell. I'm going to spread all over town that you kidnapped a child. I'm going to destroy her reputation," she pointed to the millionaire, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kinds of people you really are." The gardener stopped singing abruptly and looked directly at the stepmother with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was something in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or a sudden understanding of something important. "That song," he murmured, almost to himself. "Where have you heard that song before?" he asked the boy, who was watching him with complete attention. For the first time since his arrival, the boy opened his mouth as if to speak. No sound came out, but his lips moved, forming something that seemed familiar, something that made the gardener lean closer. The stepmother, annoyed by the attention being diverted from her threats, shouted, "Enough of this nonsense! Let's go now." But when she approached the boy to grab him, something completely unexpected happened. The child, instead of cowering in fear as he always did, held tighter to the gardener's pants and did something that shocked everyone present. He shook his head vigorously from side to side, a clear and determined no. It was the first time he had shown any kind of active resistance, any sign that he had a will of his own, and his choice was clear. He wanted to stay with the people who treated him with kindness. The boy's unexpected resistance provoked uncontrollable fury in the stepmother. Her face contorted in an expression of pure rage, and she lunged toward the child with her hands extended like claws. "You have no say in this, you ungrateful brat!" she screamed, trying to tear him from the gardener's protective arms. The gardener, moved by a paternal instinct that had been dormant in his heart for years, wrapped the boy in a protective hug. The child said no. That should mean something. "The child has no right to say anything. He belongs to me." The millionaire, watching the scene with growing horror, made a radical decision. She grabbed her phone and began dialing her most influential contacts, private investigators who had worked for her on sensitive business matters in the past. Over the following weeks, a silent war unfolded behind the scenes. The stepmother intensified her visits, always bringing new legal arguments and more elaborate threats. She had hired a bottom-feeding lawyer who advised her on how to exploit loopholes in the system to maintain her source of income. But the millionaire didn't stand still either. Her investigators began to uncover disturbing details about the stepmother's life. She wasn't just taking care of the orphan boy. There were other minors under her supposed guardianship, all in equally miserable conditions. "We found 3 other children," the lead investigator reported during a secret meeting. "All orphans, all receiving allowances that are being completely diverted. She's turned this into a lucrative business." The information made the millionaire nauseous, but also hopeful. Finally, there was concrete evidence that the stepmother wasn't a concerned guardian, but a systematic exploiter of vulnerable children. Meanwhile, the relationship between the gardener and the boy continued to blossom in surprising ways. The older man had started spending more time with the child, always singing that mysterious melody that seemed to have a magical effect on him. "It's strange," the gardener commented to the millionaire one afternoon. "That song, I used to sing it to my grandson when he was little, but there's something about this boy's reaction that intrigues me." The millionaire noticed tears in the older man's eyes. "Did you lose your grandson?" "I lost touch with him years ago. After my daughter and her husband, after the accident, there was a terrible mess with the adoption papers. The system was a mess, and I was never able to find him again." The coincidence was disturbing, but the millionaire decided not to dwell on it too much. There were more urgent issues to resolve. During this period, the boy began to show subtle signs of improvement. He still didn't speak, but he responded to the gardener's songs with small gestures. Sometimes he would nod his head to the rhythm of the music. Other times he would try to imitate the older man's lip movements. It was during one of these musical sessions that the boy did something extraordinary. When the gardener reached the part of the song that spoke about home and family, the child pointed to himself, and then to the gardener, and then to the millionaire. It was as if he was saying that they were his family now. The scene was interrupted by the sudden arrival of the stepmother, who this time brought with her a social worker. The middle-aged woman carried a folder full of documents and had a stern expression that didn't indicate anything good. "This is an official investigation," announced the social worker. "We have received reports that this child is being held here against his legal will. The stepmother smiled triumphantly. Finally, someone with common sense. Tell this rich woman that she can't just buy children like they're decorative objects. The millionaire felt the world crumble around her. All her money, all her connections, seemed useless in the face of the cold bureaucracy of the system. The officer began filling out forms to remove the boy from the mansion immediately. "I need to ask the child some questions," said the social worker, approaching the boy who had hidden behind the gardener. "He doesn't speak," explained the millionaire desperately. "He has suffered severe trauma. That will be determined by our specialists." But when the officer tried to approach, the boy did something that surprised everyone. Instead of shrinking into silence as he always did, he began to cry loudly, clinging to the gardener with desperate force. They weren't silent tears. It was a cry of despair that echoed through the walls of the mansion. The gardener, seeing the child's panic, instinctively began to sing the lullaby. The effect was immediate. The boy stopped crying, but continued clinging to him as if his life depended on it. "Interesting," murmured the social worker, making notes. "The child has clearly formed bonds here." The stepmother, realizing that the situation wasn't going as planned, tried to intervene. "He's always been difficult. That's why he needs strict discipline." It was at that moment that the private investigator discreetly arrived at the mansion with a folder full of evidence. The millionaire gave an almost imperceptible signal, and he handed the documents to the social worker. "What's this?" asked the officer, flipping through the papers. "Evidence of systematic neglect and possible fraud in the guardianship documents," replied the investigator calmly. The stepmother's face paled instantly. "Those are lies, slander from rich people trying to buy justice." But the documents were devastating. Photographs of the conditions in which other children were kept, bank records showing how the allowance was spent, and more importantly, evidence that some of the guardianship papers had been falsified. The social worker studied the documents with growing concern. "I'm going to need to investigate this more deeply. In the meantime, the child remains where he is until we can determine the veracity of these allegations." The stepmother exploded in fury. "This is unfair. You're being bought by this woman." But her anger revealed more than she intended. In her fury, she let slip details about how she managed the other children, inadvertently confirming much of what was in the investigators' reports. Over the following months, an official investigation was opened. The millionaire had to undergo rigorous evaluations to prove that she could offer a suitable home, while the stepmother faced increasingly serious questions about her practices. The boy gradually began to recover. The gardener became his unofficial father figure, spending hours teaching him about plants, about nature, and always singing that special song that seemed to touch his soul. It was during one of those sessions that something extraordinary happened. The boy, who still hadn't uttered a single word, began to hum along with the gardener. They weren't clear words, but the melody was unmistakable. The gardener stopped singing abruptly, looking at the child with an expression of absolute shock. "Where did you learn that song?" he whispered, his heart pounding. The boy looked him in the eyes and, for the first time, tried to form words. Gran, he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse, but clear enough to be understood. The gardener felt his legs weaken. The music, the child's appearance, the age that matched his calculations. Everything began to fit into a puzzle that he had been trying to solve for years. At that moment, the millionaire appeared at the door of the garden with a somber expression. "We need to talk," she said. "The investigation into the stepmother has revealed something that you need to know. Her documents are fake. She was never the legal guardian of any of these children." The revelation should have been a victory, but the gardener could barely process the information. His eyes were fixed on the boy, on his facial features, on the way he hummed that melody that had been passed down through generations of his family. "What is his real name?" asked the gardener, his voice trembling with emotion. "We're still investigating. The records have all been altered or destroyed." The millionaire noticed the gardener's strange expression. Why do you ask? Before he could answer, the boy did something that no one expected. Looking directly at the gardener, he said his second word, home. The word home echoed through the garden like a whispered miracle. The gardener felt tears well up in his eyes as he knelt beside the boy, his trembling hands gently touching the face of the child he had learned to love like a grandson. I need to tell you something, he said to the millionaire, his voice filled with emotion. That song that I sing to him, it was composed by my daughter for my grandson. It's a family song, passed down from generation to generation, and the way he reacts, how he manages to hum along. The millionaire felt a chill run down her spine. Are you suggesting that... I'm suggesting that I've spent 4 years looking for this child, that he may be my grandson, who disappeared in the bureaucratic chaos after the accident that took the lives of my children. Over the following weeks, while the official investigation into the stepmother deepened, the gardener began a desperate search for records that could confirm his suspicion. The millionaire, moved by the emotional connection she had developed with both, hired the best genealogists and private investigators available. The stepmother, realizing that her scheme was crumbling, became increasingly desperate and dangerous. She began to make direct threats, promising to destroy the lives of everyone involved if she couldn't maintain control over at least one of her sources of income. You have no idea what desperate people are capable of doing, she said during one of her last visits to the mansion, her eyes gleaming with growing madness. If I lose everything, I'll make sure you lose too. But her threats lost much of their impact when the social worker returned with preliminary results of the investigation. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Falsified documents, diverted money, children kept in deplorable conditions. All the other children under her supposed guardianship had been removed and placed in suitable homes. During this tumultuous period, the boy continued his remarkable recovery. In addition to grandpa and home, he began to pronounce other simple words: hungry when he wanted to eat, music when he wanted the gardener to sing, and no when the stepmother appeared. The defining moment came when the paternity test results were finally available. The millionaire, the gardener, and the boy were gathered in the living room when the phone call came. The results are conclusive, said the voice from the laboratory. There is a genetic match of 99.97%. The man is definitely the biological grandfather of the child. The gardener burst into tears, pulling the boy into a hug that lasted several minutes. I knew it, he whispered. My heart knew it from the first day. The millionaire, although emotionally devastated by the possibility of losing the child she had learned to love as a son, felt genuine joy at the family reunion. But her concern was practical. Would the gardener, with his modest income, be able to offer the boy all the medical and educational care he would need after years of neglect? It was then that she made the most important decision of her life. I want to adopt you both, she announced, surprising the gardener. Not officially, of course, but I want you to be my family. This mansion is too big for one person, and you both have taught me what it means to love unconditionally. The gardener, still processing the revelation about his grandson, looked at the woman who had saved the child and changed their lives forever. You would do that? I'm already doing it. You are my family now. Over the following months, life in the mansion was completely transformed. The gardener moved into one of the guest rooms, and the boy finally had a permanent room decorated with cheerful colors and toys appropriate for his age. The official investigation revealed even more shocking details about the stepmother's scheme. She had falsified not only guardianship documents, but also official certificates, creating a complex network of fraud that had lasted for years. The most disturbing thing was discovering that she had deliberately separated children from relatives who could care for them, just to maintain control over the benefits. She knew you were looking for him, one of the investigators revealed to the gardener. We found correspondence where she bragged about keeping a child hidden from a grandfather who had lost contact. The revelation explained why the stepmother had been so cruel specifically to the boy. She knew that someone was looking for him, and the more trauma she caused, the less likely he would be to remember his previous life. But love and patience had won. The boy, now 5 years old, spoke in complete sentences and laughed frequently. His physical recovery was also remarkable. With proper nutrition and regular medical care, he grew and gained weight, transforming into the healthy child he should have been all along. The gardener spent his time between caring for the plants and educating his grandson. He told stories about the boy's parents, showed old photographs that he had kept with care, and always ended the day singing the familiar lullaby. The millionaire discovered a satisfaction that her money had never provided. She used her fortune more meaningfully, establishing funds to help other orphan children and creating programs to reunite families separated by inadequate bureaucracy. The stepmother was convicted of document fraud and child neglect. During the trial, more victims came forward, other children who had suffered under her care, other families who had been separated by her greed. She received a significant sentence, but more importantly, she lost forever any right to have contact with minors. During one special afternoon, 6 months after the revelation of the boy's true identity, the makeshift family was gathered in the garden. The boy played among the flowers while the gardener worked and the millionaire read a book. "Grandpa," said the boy, running toward the gardener. "Sing Mommy's song?" The gardener smiled, pulling his grandson onto his lap. "Of course, my love." As he began to sing, the boy joined him, their voices blending in perfect harmony. The millionaire watched the scene with tears of joy, knowing that she had found the true meaning of wealth, not in her investments or assets, but in the family she had chosen, and that had chosen her back. "Mommy," said the boy suddenly, looking at the millionaire. "Yes, my love? You can sing too." She laughed through her tears. "I don't know the song." "Grandpa teaches. Family sings together." And so, under the golden afternoon sun, 3 people whom destiny had brought together in an unlikely way sang together the song that had spanned generations, proving that true love always finds a way back home. The mansion, which once echoed only with the emptiness of solitude, now resonated with laughter, conversations, and music. The gardener continued caring for the plants, but now he also cared for the soul of a family. The millionaire learned that her true fortune wasn't in dollars or stocks, but in the daily hugs of a child and the wisdom of a man who had lost everything but never lost hope. And the boy, who had begun his journey in absolute despair, now ran through the gardens of the mansion, knowing that he was safe, loved, and finally home. The music that the gardener sang wasn't just a lullaby. It was the soundtrack of a family that had found each other against all odds, proving that sometimes the happiest endings are born from the most painful beginnings.